Good morning. Welcome to the Planning and Economic Development Subcommittee. Today is May 7th, 2019. I will be calling the meeting to order. I have call to the public. I don't have any cards. Is there anybody want anything from call to the public? If not, you'll have an opportunity at the end. Minutes of the meeting. For approval or corrections, the minutes of Planning and Economic Development Subcommittee meeting on April 2nd, 2019. I don't know, we got some great music going.
What is it?
Is there, I don't know, sounds like somebody's outside with the band.
Okay. It is catchy.
Oh, Thunderbird graduation, great to know. Do I have a motion for the minutes?
So moved. Second?
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. I have consent actions, items 2 through 5. I can read them. Anybody? Are you okay?
Yep.
Do we have a motion?
Move to approve consent. Second?
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Discussion and possible action. Item 6, interior suite with the accessory cooking facilities text amendment. I do have a card. You want to present, and then I'll do the card. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. This item is a text amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow accessory cooking facilities in what is termed next-gen suites that allow multi-generational living within them. Ms. Trish Gomes has been the project manager for this, and I'm going to let her go ahead and walk you through the rest of the PowerPoint here.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Yes, TA 6-18 is a text amendment regarding the interior suites with accessory cooking facilities. It's on. Just kidding.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's on, but it's not forwarding. Jessica, can you get?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so the existing zoning ordinance requirements do allow semi-private spaces under the same roof in a single-family home within the main building envelope with additional amenities such as refrigerators, sinks, dishwashers, microwaves, washer, dryer, counter, food prep area, which is illustrated in the photo on the left under permitted. What is not currently allowed under the zoning ordinance is a second cooking facility, which is illustrated on the right-hand side under not permitted. This is what this text amendment is seeking to allow. In addition, the general plan also calls for modifications to our zoning ordinance to allow for multi-generational housing products. This would achieve that. So once again, everything that's allowed on the left-hand side is what is currently permitted under the zoning ordinance. What this text amendment is seeking is to allow that second cooking facility within a detached single-family home. So what are we proposing? We're proposing establishing a definition for interior suite with accessory cooking facilities, as well as adding language to section 608, which is our residential standards section, which addresses locational and size criteria, conditions for use, and a design requirement. So the definition of an interior suite with accessory cooking facilities is a room or group of rooms located within a single dwelling unit designed or arranged to allow for semi-private residential use and includes an accessory cooking facility. An interior suite with accessory cooking facility would be allowed in all subdivisions of 15 acres or larger. In new subdivisions that were subdivided after the effective date of the ordinance, or in residential subdivisions that were subdivided prior to the effective date, but less than 25% of the lots having constructed dwelling units or valid building permits. This is to really address those subdivisions that were started during the downturn and are now starting to revive and be rebuilt to allow this type of housing product. With that applicability, it limits the area to 8 villages, which is focusing on the northern and southern peripheries of the city that have the greatest amount of vacant land and meet the size criteria. The conditions for use for the interior suite with accessory cooking facilities, it shall be limited or shall be under the same roof structure, permitted only one on a lot, have an interior doorway to and from the remainder of the dwelling unit, and provide no more than 1 parking space with a maximum of 4 spaces. The interior suite with accessory cooking facilities shall not exceed 30% of the total net area or 800 square feet, whichever is less. So an example would be an 1,800 square foot home would allow up to 540 square feet for the interior suite with accessory cooking facility. It shall not have a separate meter, a private yard, or a private driveway, and shall have only 1 mailing address. The intent is that all should be operating under that single-family home. And to address concerns through the process that this would have an appearance of a duplex, that there are design criteria that would minimize any secondary entry visible from the street and have an appearance of a single-family home. Five of the village planning committees recommended approval with no changes, while 3 village planning committees recommended approval with a modification. Planning Commission recommended approval with 1 modification to include language that clarifies that the interior suite with accessory cooking facility be limited to the ground floor. Planning Commission did not move forward with the recommendation of adding a suite number because we felt that that was included in the address requirement, and did not move forward with the expanding the applicability citywide and making it retroactive. And with that, staff requests that the subcommittee approve text amendment TA 6-18 as approved by the Planning Commission. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have a card in favor. It's Taylor Earl. Did you wish to speak or? Okay. Well, if you want it on the record, it's up to you. So, okay. That's the difference between speaking and not speaking. You want it on the record or no?
Happy to be here for the record. My name is Taylor Earl. Our address is 3101 North Central Avenue. So for the record, we're in favor. So we represent Lennar Homes, who does have a multi-generational product. Obviously, there are other builders that do, and I can only speak on behalf of Lennar today. But we are very supportive of this. This is something that we're doing across the valley with ovens, and in Phoenix doing simply without the oven. And so we see this as a very small incremental gain and done in a way with staff's with the caveats that staff's put into the ordinance. We think it's done very responsibly and will be a great benefit to a lot of residents.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Is there a motion?
I move to approve the text amendment.
Do you have a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Councilman Nowakowski is on the phone.
Yes, ma'am.
We are on item 7.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. As you know, my name is Spencer Self. I'm the director of our Neighborhood Services Department, and I'm joined today by Jessica Gonzalez, our Grants Compliance Supervisor, and Christy Blake, our Management Assistant 2 with our Grants Group. And today we're here to present a couple of items related to the federal grants we received from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This first item represents the culmination of the outreach and hard work put into planning how the city will use the federal funds as documented in our annual action plan, which this year is due to HUD on August 16th. As a reminder, we received 4 federal formula grants. The first is our Community Development Block Grant, which is used for housing rehabilitation, infrastructure, neighborhood revitalization, economic development, and a portion of those funds are available for public services, which we'll talk about in our next presentation. These funds are overseen by the Neighborhood Services Department. Additionally, we have our Home Investment Partnership and Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS funds, which are used for affordable housing and special need housing for low and moderate income communities, and for housing and social services for persons with HIV or AIDS. Those funds are overseen by our Housing Department. And finally, we have our Emergency Solutions Grant, which is overseen by our Human Services Department and used to provide services for people experiencing homelessness. I will now turn the presentation over to Jessica to go through our planning process for this year.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. We kicked off the annual action plan process last September with a presentation to this subcommittee followed by City Council approval later that month. We then scheduled a public hearing on October 15th to engage the community, and please note that the council report misstates that date as October 2019. It occurred in 2018. Our apologies. We then followed with outreach to residents, nonprofit agencies, and neighborhood associations through emails and social media in an effort to gather public input on how these funds should be spent. While each grant has a specific focus tied to federal requirements, the grants are designed to allow for some degree of flexibility in tailoring programs to community needs. As Spencer stated, the annual action plan is due to HUD by August 16th. And to meet this deadline, and in the absence of HUD allocations, we prepared a draft annual action plan that contained contingency language relative to funding and began the mandatory public comment period on April 2nd. On April 12th, HUD released funding allocations for our grants, and a revised draft of the annual action plan was made available to the public on April 29th. This extended our 30-day public comment period through the end of May. We held our final public hearing yesterday on May 6th and incorporated the results of all public comments into the plan. What you see on this slide reflects the programs and services requested by the community during our public comment period. This year, we heard from community members who noted senior services, services for youth, and services for persons with disability as community needs. These areas continue to be city priorities and align with services currently provided.
Thank you, Jessica. So at this point, we would normally request a recommendation for council to approve our annual action plan process. However, we wanted to hold off until the end of our next presentation, which is on our public service and public facility request for proposal process, in case there are any modifications we might need to make to the annual action plan. So if there are no questions, we'll continue on with our second presentation. Apologies, we absorbed them both into one, and it looks like, all right, here we are. Thank you. On this item, we want to bring to you the award recommendations for our public service and public facility CDBG request for proposal process, the result of a process that began back in October when we received direction from the subcommittee on this very process. As a reminder, the public services are activities that provide critical services benefiting low and moderate income communities across the city in priority areas designated by City Council. We also fund public facility activities that can include acquisition, construction, rehabilitation, and ADA modifications to public facilities benefiting low and moderate income communities. With direction from the City Council to move forward with the request for proposal process in October, we proceeded with the competitive request process with the 3 priority areas that were identified by Council. And we received a total of 54 responsive proposals totaling almost $2 million. With this level of response, it is clear that there is a lot of need in the community for funds to provide and sustain programs for low and moderate income residents. The mayor-appointed Community Development Review Committee then reviewed each proposal and selected finalists to come present their programs and how the funds benefit the clients they serve. Based on the committee's ranking of each proposal and presentation and the 2019-20 funding allocation of $352,891 for the public service category and $427,000 available for public facility improvements, the committee developed a funding recommendation. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Christy Blake, who will provide the recommended awards.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. As mentioned, there are 3 categories in our public service priority. Youth services is the category in which we received the most proposals. Out of the 36 total public service applications, we received 25 responsive proposals in this category with a total ask of over $641,000. With the current funding, we can award funds to the 9 applications listed on the slide for a little over $240,500. These agencies provide services such as offering basic necessities such as food and clothing for low and moderate income residents, homework assistance, life skills training and mentoring for homeless youth, and mentorship and education for at-risk youth. The next category is for support services for persons with disabilities. We received 6 applications for a total ask of almost $179,800. With the current funding, we can award to the 3 applications listed on the slide for just over $67,000. These agencies provide services such as interactive programs to increase learning and independence, workforce development, therapeutic, recreational, and social activities for persons with disabilities. Our last public service category is for support services for seniors. We received 5 applications for a total ask of just over $120,000. With the current funding, we can award funds to the 2 applicants listed on the slide for a total ask of almost $45,000. These agencies provide services such as transportation and case management and socialization programs to promote and support self-sufficiency and independent living for seniors. And finally, our public facility category. We had 8 applicants for a total ask of more than $1 million. The CD Review Committee recommends awarding funds to the 3 awards listed on the slide for almost $427,000. These agencies will use CDBG funds to provide secure and safe facilities and to upgrade critical facility components to provide services for programming.
Thank you, Christy. So with that, we would request 2 recommendations. One, to approve the 2019-20 CDBG Public Service and Public Facility RFP recommended awards. And second, to recommend City Council approval of our annual action plan.
Anybody have questions?
Thank you.
Councilwoman
How-
Mendoza.
Thank you. How does your department do outreach to nonprofits or just groups out there about this grant?
Sure. So primarily, we send information out. We post a notice in a newspaper, which is a HUD requirement. We don't think that does a very good job of getting outreach to our most needed communities. We also use our neighborhood notification listing to send information to all of the city's neighborhood organizations that are listed with the Neighborhood Services Department. We also send out emails to our listserv, which is a group of organizations that are interested in these funds, or folks who have reached out to us in the past or participated in our annual action plan or public service, public facility RFP process. Are there any areas that I'm missing? Oh, yeah.
We also do social media outreach through our PIO, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. What's the last one? Neighborhoods at work. Just different social outreach media as well.
Okay. And from your past applicants, are these the same or different applicants that are receiving the funding this time around?
Councilwoman, if you're referring to the RFP proposal process, we've most of the applicants are continuing or have submitted proposals in prior years. We did have some new agencies and proposals that were submitted this year as well, but they do they vary as to whether they're new or continuing programs.
Okay. Thank you.
So when you, I hear newspaper. So when I hear newspaper, I also hear La Voz. I hear different newspapers in different languages. And that's what I hear because different agencies serve different populations. So if that's a requirement, I would like to look at that information going into diverse newspapers. The other piece was neighborhoods all have newsletters. So in coordinating with those neighborhoods, when to put that, I don't know if it would be an advertisement or information piece, out to those neighborhood newsletters, because a lot of the nonprofits that live in those neighborhoods engage. And so that would be another way I would look at getting more agencies to involved, or smaller agencies, really smaller agencies, because the larger agencies are aware and know. I have a question regarding one of the slides, I don't know which one it was, about homelessness. Because if you go back to public participation, you see homeless services.
Oops.
So I don't know where this goes. I don't know if this is part of the RFP or where it lands in the RFP.
Sure, that's a phenomenal question. Within our annual action plan, we provide funds to community bridges, separate from this RFP process. We also provide a homeless service block that the Human Services Department administers. We provide funding for, at AeroTerra, to provide outreach services for previously homeless youth. So there's a variety of ways these funds go towards homeless services, in addition to the Emergency Solutions Grant, which is entirely overseen by the Human Services Department. All of those are outside of this process. However, in the past, funds that were used in this process have been diverted for some of those purposes.
So what I'm saying is homelessness used to be part of this RFP, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. I just remember only when I sat on committees in this process, homelessness was part of this.
And that's absolutely a potential priority category. And so in future years, when we look to set the agenda for how these funds will be used, that's absolutely a way that they can be.
Okay, I guess my request is to include it. I don't know if I'm asking something that,
No, I think what you're asking, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, is when we come in the fall to set the priorities on what you all believe we should put out in the RFP, you'd like to include homelessness as part of this
Okay.
RFP
Got
process,
it.
outside of the additional funding we're already allocating.
correct. Okay, go ahead.
Madam Chair, my recommendation is to talk to the mayor and see if we can make a work study out of this. Because I think in different parts of the city, there's different needs, and making sure that all needs are being taken care of or are considered. Like homelessness is something big in our
all
areas
districts.
and starting to spread out in all districts, but there might be something else happening in other districts that aren't up there right now, right? And I think a campaign also through ourselves, through our newsletters, to let people know that there are these types of funds to really help those areas out. And maybe some type of a map letting us know which areas are eligible for this, because I guess there's that, I was just listening to you there. You go by census tracts, or how do you do that?
Right, so depending on the organization, they can either be located in a low and moderate income neighborhood, which is absolutely based on census tracts, or they can serve communities that are low and moderate income, in which case they often actually do a test, and collect information from each client about their income levels. So there's multiple ways. And Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, to your point about better outreach and maybe different uses of these funds, next year we'll be going through our 5-year consolidated process, which will allow us to really take a deeper dive into how we use all of our funds. And I think those are the perfect questions that can get to how to better serve our low and moderate income residents across the city.
Councilwoman Mendoza.
Can I get a copy of the organizations that received this grant in the last round?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So is there a motion for items 7 and 8, correct?
Yes.
We put it together as one?
I would request two
separate.
separate.
Okay. So for item 7, is there a motion?
Second.
There's a motion, there's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And then there's a motion for item 8, recommend city council approval of the HUD 2019-2020 annual action plan. Is that correct?
No, it's the previous one, the public service and public facilities.
So the recommendations, I apologize,
They're
are
out of
in
order.
opposite order.
Okay.
The bottom one is 7, the top is 8.
Okay, so 8 is recommend city council approval of 2019-2020 community development block grant, public service and public facilities projects. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
Is there a second? There's no second? Second. Okay, there's a motion, there's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. I would recommend with the 5 of the consolidated or the process for next year, possibly September. There is a conversation with council regarding the areas and information that will be needed in order to determine what we want to, how we move forward. Okay. Did I grab it?
Sounds great.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Item 9, mapping of a highly concentrated multi-housing units and community engagement.
Good morning, Chairwoman Pastor and members of the subcommittee. So you will recall that last month we were here talking about April being Fair Housing Month, and there were a few follow-up questions that subcommittee members had. One question was asking for a visual map of where the multifamily housing is throughout the city, and then also you wanted to learn more about citywide community outreach throughout the year, not only just in April when it's Fair Housing Month. With me today are Spencer Self from the Neighborhood Services Department, Don Logan from Equal Opportunity, and Cindy Stotler from the Housing Department. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Spencer.
Thank you, Tony. So as Tony mentioned, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, there was particularly a request to visually see the concentration of multifamilies across the city of Phoenix. Of interest and areas that were noted were West Phoenix and South Phoenix. Interestingly enough, when we mapped that density, there wasn't a high level in the West and South Phoenix. And I think that is sort of counterintuitive to what we would expect when we looked at this map. It took me by surprise. And so I went a step further, and we outlaid our calls for landlord-tenant customer service. So related to our the Arizona landlord-tenant law, tenants reach out to us and our staff to get information about that law. And what you'll see is a distribution that probably is more what we would expect, which is certainly there is a high level of rentals in the west side and the south side of the city of Phoenix. And we think that this is attributed to really that classification of multifamily. So when we're talking about multifamilies, we're talking about 4 units or more. However, it excludes single family, duplexes, triplexes. And so I think that really what you were asking was, are we doing a good job of providing outreach in those areas where we would expect a high level of renters? So to answer some of those questions, we layered on our outreach between the Neighborhood Services Department and the Equal Opportunity Department. And you can see those in pink. And this is more in line with where we see our customers who reach out to us. So there is a pretty good distribution across the city of Phoenix. And finally, we layered onto the map the locations where we actually get fair housing requests for investigations. And I'll turn it over to Don to talk a little bit more about that.
Spencer, thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, if I can direct your attention to the map above on the screen. Last month, you asked that we return to share locations where fair housing complaints were investigated. The yellow diamonds depicted on the map illustrates locations where Equal Opportunity staff investigated complaints. In addition, you asked that we come back to share year-round fair housing outreach efforts. In 2014, the city was awarded a HUD outreach grant. The purpose of the grant was to contact underrepresented populations who represent those residents with limited English proficiencies, refugees, and members of the LGBT community. We hired Lucha, L-U-C-H-A, a local community-based nonprofit organization, to partner with us in achieving fair housing outreach goals. Between 2014 and 18, which was the period of which Lucha was hired, we hosted 99 training events, of which 2,169 folks attended. Through our partnership with Lucha, we contacted 3,977 people at 40 multifamily locations, and EOD staff participated in 42 community events where we disseminated information about our fair housing program to over 14,000 attendees. With that, Madam Chair, members of the committee, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilman Nowakowski?
Can you go back about 3 slides? So right here, those squares, those dark squares are where we actually did the outreach.
Correct.
So if you look on really south of the river, from Central Avenue to South Mountain, there was no outreach at all, right?
Wait, even south, east, southwest.
Yeah, I mean, the real Salal is right there in there, so.
That is true. What we noticed is there is a gap right there along the central corridor, as well as in the Levine area. We noticed that there's a real opportunity to do better outreach and hold more events. And so we are interested in doing exactly that in this next year. We really appreciate the subcommittee bringing this forward because we've never mapped this information. So to see it visually, it really does provide a lot of context and kind of answers for us into how we could do things better. And if you have any specific locations where you think we should hold workshops, that would be even better.
Well, I'm seeing right now that Estrella Mountain and the Levine Village and South Mountain Village are 3 areas that you all have to concentrate big time, right? And I think we need to use data that's at our fingertips. I mean, if we look at census tracts and we could figure out where the lowest income areas are, I think you'd find that areas in West Phoenix and in the southwest side of our city would probably be some prime areas to look into.
Sorry,
Go for it.
Councilwoman Mendoza. I'm looking at the data. South of the river bottom, I have four events happened. Is that because is it saying that there's no multifamily?
No. In fact, so the density map, and it's very difficult to see on this slide, but the areas, there are areas represented in yellow, which are kind of the lower density, versus the darker, the green, the higher density. And so it's not as high of density as, say, the central corridors along the spines of the freeway, where we have a lot of our, densest multifamily of 4 units or more.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is in the South Mountain Village and Levine area, there is density. And so I guess I'm just surprised that those areas do have density, and it is, if we look at the census tract, I'm sure it is low income.
Absolutely.
And everything that is looked at on the census tract, and I guess I'm in shock.
And Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, this data is strictly the density. This doesn't have any sort of overlay or connection with our low and moderate income areas. And it may be just a facet of how the data was distributed. Particularly in the areas that were low were between 0.35 to 7.07 units or facilities per square mile. And so, if you lower that and you look probably in less than a square mile, there may be higher density areas that are just a little bit more difficult to represent in a map of the entire city. So certainly, again, I would say that when we lay the information about our rental customers who are reaching out to us, there's good distribution on the south side and the west side. And so absolutely those areas that kind of make sense that you're saying, these are areas where you should target, we completely agree. And we really appreciate the opportunity to kind of see this data. And I like the idea of looking further into using the census information to, again, help us strategize where to target in the future.
Councilwoman Mendoza.
Thank you. I'm a little surprised on the west side. There's not a lot of EOD investigations on that side. And having worked in that area, I know there's a lot. So I'm just wondering, why is that?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Mendoza, last month we shared the number of complaints as compared to the number of investigations. And the disparity that you see in that is there is certain requirements that have to be met in terms of determining whether someone who perceives they were discriminated against versus that there's enough evidence to warrant a formal investigation. The number of complaints that we see geographically in the West Valley, based on that information that I shared last month, is those that formally emerge into a formal complaint. It doesn't change the perception that there may be more activity that are occurring in those areas. We just, based on the data that was collected and that we reported to HUD, our numbers are different.
Last month, you brought some information on 2 outreach events that your department was doing this year. One was a Pride Parade and the other one was one of the churches. Are you going to be doing more this year? Any more community outreach events?
Madam Chair, one of the, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Mendoza, clearly this exercise in terms of consolidating the information that speaks to where we do our investigation and how far we extend our outreach is valuable information that we'll use in terms of planning and moving forward our efforts. We're certainly open to any suggestions that council or anyone may have in terms of areas where we feel we need to extend our outreach and share with the community, what the Fair Housing Program is about, how they can submit a complaint, and who they need to submit a complaint with.
Councilman Nowakowski.
Well, it's disturbing to look at these numbers or just these EOD investigations. If you look at the I-17, anything west of the I-17, the numbers really drop. Anything, that's very odd because that's where we get most of our calls. I mean, I can't understand that. The other thing too is, were you guys out at the Cinco de Mayo events? I know that it was heavily on the west side and the south side of town. I didn't see any information booths out there or anything like that. So I think we need to do a better job in marketing and letting people know that if they're being discriminated against, that there is a resource that we as the city of Phoenix have, and I believe we need to send that message out to people because I know we get it, and I'm not sure where we actually, I think we send it to you all. So I know that there's a lot more complaints coming into, I know, my office, more than that dozen that you have up there in my district. So it's just really disturbing to see that. The other thing too is, can I get a report on how many vouchers we give out to low-income individuals so we can see which area in town, just privately to myself, I want to see where those individuals are living also, if there's any in the southwest area of the city or not. Because one of the things I hear out in the Estrella Mountain and Levine and South Phoenix is a lot of complaints about renters and not being able to enforce homeowners and neighborhood association regulations on different people, because by the time you find the owner of the property, the renters are out. So we get a lot of those complaints also. So I like to see a better plan on how we're going to outreach to individuals, making sure that people know that there's a resource there to help individuals out. And I like to see some more studies and using data, census tracts, and even our own data that we have in-house, that we're giving out vouchers to homeless individuals and to veterans and to poor families, where those vouchers are also going out. Madam Chair.
I would like to know what the requirements are. Because if I do a complaint, because I think this is where some of the dynamics could happen, is complaints are different from investigations. And so if I make a complaint, then what I'm hearing is there's some steps to be made or requirements that we would have to meet in order for it to go into an investigation. So what I'm going to ask for is the process, and we could have a discussion regarding that, but I would like to know the process of making a complaint, and then how does it get to an investigation, what is needed, because truly that is where there's probably where we'll see the gap because of the documentation. And so I would say that's where education really needs to happen within our community on how do I go about, if I see this, do this, what documentation do I need in order for it then to go to an investigation. But that's just us knowing processes. So.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, you're absolutely correct. Equal Opportunity Department would be happy to provide you the information as requested.
Okay. I had one more, but I forgot. Tony, you remember that calendar? And when I first got elected, I said there should be a calendar that has all the different events going on in the city and outreach pieces, because at the time, as a councilwoman, I was getting bombarded by requests and asks, and oh, we're doing this in this department, and we're doing this in this department, and a calendar was created. So I'm not sure how updated that calendar is, but my ask is that every department put all their outreach stuff in that calendar.
Yes, Chairwoman, I
And
do
what-
remember that calendar, and I would need to, I'll check with the communications office and see how that's being maintained and updated frequently.
Because that was the intent. The intent was
Yes.
to have everything in there so that then we could see and know where we needed to be, or determine if we were going to be able to make those events. And it was also for citywide, so that they could see all the different events where staff was being pulled.
Yes, and I recall too, you could select different areas of interest. and I'll check with communications and get back with you.
Okay. Everybody,
Good.
thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. The next item is the Phoenix Convention Center South Building. I have a card on this one too.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee.
Morning.
We're here to provide a snapshot of South Hall and also to provide a connection to some of the earlier business decisions that were made about the overall convention center campus. And with me are Director John Chan from the Convention Center and Chris Mackey, the Director of Economic Development. And John will start the presentation.
Thank you, Milton, Madam Chair, and members of the subcommittee.
Thank you for allowing us to be here today to talk about the South Building of the Phoenix Convention Center campus. The South Building was opened in 1985 as an expansion of the then Phoenix Civic Plaza. That dates back to 1972 when the building first opened. The site sits on a super block, so it's more than 2 city blocks assembled. It's 9.27 acres in size. The building is just under 290,000 total square feet, with 143,400 square feet of that as rentable exhibit hall, meeting rooms, ballroom space. So that's the rentable portion of the building. So as you look at this image, this is an image of the building taken from the north building. Looking south, you see Chase Field and the East Garage in the background. I want to call your attention to a couple things in this photo. In the foreground, you see the light rail tracks on the north side of Washington Street, as well as just to the north of that, where that first row of palm trees are. That's where the shoring wall project is going to be constructed adjacent to the north building. So I'll talk about more of that in a minute, but I wanted to call that to your attention in this photo. In terms of activity, the building gets used about 218 days a year. We host approximately 86 events there. And as you can see, just from an attendance standpoint, a majority of the building is used for local events, 172,000 total attendance, but a majority of that is local events, with a portion of that being the national conventions.
So when you say local events, do you mean volleyball? Because I know volleyball, I don't know where it is, but I know volleyball, there's cheer.
Right.
I can't remember, there's another one that my girlfriend's all.
So here's an example. This will give you a flavor of the local business that's booked in that South Building on a regular basis. So this is, we do a lot of graduations. There's commencement exercise season right now. The bridal show, the women's expo. A lot of the local associations hold their meetings in the South Building, along with banquets. So this is primarily the type of business that's booked in the South Building on a regular basis. And the reason the South Building is used so extensively by local business is that our north and west buildings, which is part of the expansion project, is primarily booked for national conventions and trade shows. So this is the business that's booked typically 3 to 5 years out, and that's generally booked in the north and the west building. In fact, we have convention business that's booked as far out as 2032. So that's the long-term booking strategy for those national groups. In terms of fiscal and economic impact, the building generates $2 million a year in direct revenues to the Convention Center's Enterprise Fund. So this is direct revenues that are from rental fees and commissions that are made from catering, audiovisual, and IT services provided. Operating expenses are about $1 million a year. And then on the economic impact, this is a very conservative estimate of the direct revenues that flow to the state's general fund as a result of spending from convention attendees, meeting planners, and exhibitors. So this aerial photograph that you're seeing now is an image of the Convention Center's expansion master plan. This master plan was adopted by the City Council in 2002. And as you can see on the master plan, Phase 1, which is the West Building, was opened in 2006. Phase 2, the North Building, was opened in 2008. And the Phase 3, there was not a timeline attached to it, but the vision was that the Phase 3 expansion site would be a contiguous expansion of the North Building to the south, across and underneath Washington Street. So that was the plan that was envisioned back in 2002 during the expansion project. And as you know, during the expansion project, a temporary shoring wall was built on the south side of the North Building. And this was done as a means to facilitate future expansion. And so the photo on the left shows the north building under construction, and that wall that you see with the south building in the background is the temporary shoring wall that our structural engineers are telling us is approaching the end of its useful life and needs to be replaced. So the image on the right actually shows what that permanent shoring wall solution would be. So this was what it would look like below grade. So this is going to go down about 45, 50 feet below grade. And as you can see, this essentially precludes an underground expansion of the north building. So that's just one of the physical constraints that require us to reconsider the master plan and how the future expansion of the convention center would be accomplished.
I have a question to that.
Sure.
So you're saying because of the shoring wall and the replacement, this would preclude, I'm not saying that word right, would not allow the South Convention Center to connect to the north. Is that what I just heard you say?
Correct. So as in this photo,
okay.
it was envisioned as an underground expansion that would be contiguous, that this shoring wall precludes that type of.
How were you going to do that? Because you wouldn't need a shoring wall, or you would have needed a wall anyways in order to connect. So what was the plan at the time, and how did it shift? Because there was a plan to connect, and it was never going to be a temporary wall. There was always going to be a structured wall. So how did it shift, and why did it shift? And is it possible then to connect?
Chairwoman, I believe at the time, the vision was that the Phase 3 expansion would occur in a decade or so. And so I think at the time, the consensus was, all right, if the city's going to expand the convention center within the next 10 years, let's build a temporary wall so that way it's easier at that time. Well, 10 years has come and gone, and I don't believe that an expansion as envisioned is feasible for a number of reasons. The other thing that needs to be taken into consideration is light rail. So when this plan was put together, the light rail tracks had not been built, so that would be another thing that would complicate a underground expansion as envisioned.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. It needs to go on the record because there's a lot of things moving regarding South Hall, and so I want it on the record as to why we're not able to do what we had anticipated.
Correct. So those things have changed. So we would need to look at different alternatives on how we would approach a future expansion down the road.
Okay. Councilman Nowakowski?
We can always use like sidewalks and stuff like that, right? And
Exactly.
expand over the road, right?
A sky bridge could be a perfect way to connect the north and the south, yes. So as we look at our long-term expansion needs for the convention center, and in particular the south building, one of the things that we would need to evaluate is our competitive position in the industry, because it's not only just looking at the local market, but how do we compete for national convention and trade show business. So this is a graphic of 20 of the top convention destinations that we compete with. The bars represent total square footage of exhibition space, which is an industry standard on how convention centers are measured. The gold portion of those bars describe the amount of contiguous exhibit hall space. So as you can see, we are, Phoenix is a little farther behind a lot of our competitors in terms of contiguous exhibit hall space. So again, as we look into the future, one of the things that we would need to consider is where do we want to be in terms of maintaining our position as a top tier convention and visitor destination. So we'd look at the market and what the market tells us our long-term needs are. And then we would also need, as part of this, to get input from our key stakeholders, which would include, the downtown community, the hotels, the business community, our partners in the convention and visitor industry, along with our customers who rent our buildings. And so that would be part of the process in determining a long-term plan and needs. So with that kind of takes us to the end of our presentation portion, and we'd be happy to answer questions.
So I heard, which the statement is, what do we want to be? And then I heard you state that, in so many words, and John, you could correct me if I'm wrong, that we would like to go out to our stakeholders and those that, and I don't know, stakeholders or users even, of the convention hall to see what do we want to be.
I think that would be part of a long-range planning process, is to get that input from our customers.
And then I also, I'm just reading into, don't ask why, what I'm hearing and what I would like to do is bring this back for action in June to do a stakeholder, user, whatever we want to call it, meeting or meetings. And so kind of like, I don't want to be caught up in like the light rail, the arena, and all that. I want to do or see a robust community outreach for South Hall. So is that what I'm just reading into what you just said?
Certainly doable, yes.
Okay, all right. Councilwoman Stark, and then Councilman Malkowski.
Thank you. I've been approached by various developers who are interested in this parcel of land, so I appreciate your presentation today, because I was trying to understand, looking at our old expansion master plan versus what some people would like to see. But I do think it's important, because I know we had an RFP last year that was unsolicited, correct?
Correct. It was submitted in December of 17.
And it really didn't involve the key users. It didn't involve stakeholders around the downtown area. And so I think if we do want to pursue in the future another RFP, I think it's important that we do this extensive outreach. It's very important. I know you heard it in your subcommittee before I was on the subcommittee, but I think we need that input. Clearly, people have ideas of what they'd like to see there, but we really need to get buy-in. And I think that would help us then write a RFP and look at scoring and looking at all that kind of information.
Councilman Malkowski.
So I've been here since 2008 when the second phase was opened. And then we talked about in the near future we would actually start phase 3. We talked about maybe even moving the Suns Arena there. We looked at different options, but then the economy kind of dropped, and we're 10 years later, and we're still talking about phase 3. I like to look at it as a business opportunity for the city of Phoenix. So let's talk about Cityscape. How big is this compared to Cityscape, this block, Chris? In size, is it bigger, smaller, or about the same?
This is 9 acres, Madam Chair and Councilman Nowakowski. If this is 9 acres, it's about.
It's about the same.
It's about the same.
Over two city blocks.
It is. It's very close to the same. It's a little bit bigger than Cityscape is.
So we were talking about how much does Cityscape generate in revenues for us
Madam Chair.
a year?
Councilman Nowakowski, from our meetings with the Suns Arena, that was one of the analysis that we used, and they generate about $6.5 million in revenue to the city each year.
And then after expenses, what does the South Hall generate? Was it like 750 or 100
Direct
million?
revenue to the enterprise fund is about $1 million a year. That doesn't include the tax revenues that are generated from spending.
Okay. And we have, because we own the property, there's no property tax or any of that kind of stuff. That's
Correct.
That's
We own
generated
it
from.
free and clear.
All right. And my thing would be is if we look at doing something with the South Hall, we would actually either figure out a way where we can sell it and keep a quarter of it, so for future expansion for the city, that we can actually expand to sort of like what we did with I used to work at the Diocese of Phoenix, and across the street was the we called the deck, Civic Plaza deck, right, where we used to do all of our events and stuff. And then all of a sudden that wiped out to put phase 1 in there, and then our old convention center was basically phase 2 portion of it. It was and that was a parking lot and a little, I guess it was a little convention on the side of it, wasn't it? So I would like to see somehow, some way where the city of Phoenix still owns a quarter of it. So in case in the future we have to expand, that we can actually go up maybe 22 stories of convention space if we need to. I think it's really important that we're the 5th largest city, we continue to grow, that we don't outgrow our convention space, that we make sure that we keep some of this prime property in the city of Phoenix's portfolio. Saying that, meanwhile, I mean, we had best practices of the past where we had a deck where we used it for events and fiestas and gatherings and stuff like that. I think that's kind of low maintenance, that we can actually, if we don't have immediate plans, that we can keep a quarter of it for some type of public use or so, or for future Super Bowls and stuff like that, seeing that we lost Block 23. So I think that's really, really important. The other thing back in 2008 we talked about was First Street, activating that into sort of like a pedestrian mall area where it's more of a destination point. Since then, the economy dropped and those plans went out the door, but we kept the Adams Street project connected to that. So saying that, I think that 3rd Street activation in front of our facility, and also all the way up to the Sheridan Hotel, is really important, that there's some type of pedestrian connectivity. And when you walk outside the Civic Plaza, I mean, I keep on calling it Civic Plaza, our convention center, that you have that wow factor, you have somewhere to go. It's a cool, funky place to hang out if you're here trying to experience the Southwest or so. And I think that I'd like to really see that be a part of it, that how can we activate that third Street somehow, some way, where it's more pedestrian friendly, where if you're a conventioneer or if you live in the city of Phoenix, that'll be a place just to hang out. So those are kind of things that I would like to see you ask the community if they would like to see something like that. The other thing, talking about finances, is that right now this is actually in an opportunity zone. Is that correct, Chris? Is this?
Madam Chair, Councilman Nowakowski, that's correct. This is in an opportunity zone.
And the opportunity, the final process of opportunity zones should be hopefully before July 1st, right? Where it would be submitted and people can actually start, the plan would be out, right?
Madam Chair, Councilman Nowakowski, there are a number of cities around the country where funds have already implemented the opportunity zone information. If they're not complex projects, they've already submitted, even in the absence of all of the rules and being finalized, they've submitted. We've not seen that happen here in Arizona yet, but those final rules, they're saying, should be completed by the 1st of July. That's correct.
So if we have this kind of like we call shovel ready, for anyone who wants to use those types of opportunity zones, they can maximize that opportunity with this project, right? Your opinion, I mean.
Madam Chair, Councilman Nowakowski, the Opportunity Fund, the Opportunity Zone program has a 10-year window on it. And so it is, it sunsets in December of 2026. And those capital gains are to be placed the longest term that you have is the earlier you place them in the fund, the longer the benefit is in the program.
So what I'm hearing is by December 31st, you can maximize the most out of that fund, and after that, it drops down a little percentage or so. And every year it drops down, right, on the profit margin that the developer or the funders could actually benefit from it, right?
Councilman, you're correct. In the initial placement of the capital gains, the greatest reduction on your overall capital gains in the 10-year window, the greatest portion would be an investment that begins before the end of this year. And that does drop down into, this is the last time you can appreciate 15%. It then drops down to as low as a 7% reduction on your capital gains tax. The window of the investment being non-taxable remains for the entire 10 years.
Okay. So
what does that mean?
Chairwoman, let's use an example of I have $1 million and I sold my apartment building and I had $1 million profit of capital gains. And so I put that $1 million, and let's use the South Hall since that's what we're talking about. I put my $1 million into the South Hall. That $1 million, I don't have to pay capital gains on it for the 7 years until December 31st of 2026.
Right.
I've left it placed. If I place it before the end of this year, I get to reduce my capital gains in 2026 by 15%. And that tiers down until it reaches a zero number. If my $1 million becomes $5 million in my investment because now a building's built and jobs were created, and now my $1 million is worth $5 million in that investment, my $4 million of profit is non-taxable for the entire 10-year period of time. I see a reduction on my original placement of what I benefit over the next 3 years.
And that's advantageous to whom?
Chairwoman, that is advantageous to the developer, the people who place money into the fund.
Into the fund or
The
investors?
investors.
Yeah, the investors.
Yes, ma'am.
Got it.
So the advantage that we have as City of Phoenix is that there's a resource of funding out there, and if we want to have a nice project with some bells and whistles, then developers will have some type of resources to turn to make sure that their project is funded, right?
Chairwoman, Councilman Nowakowski, we've seen so far approximately 24 funds form across the metro area that are all looking for their placements and getting ready to make those placements.
All right.
So do we, in the 24 funds, do we know who is part of the 24 funds?
Chairwoman.
Or do you know in forming the 24 funds, do you know, would we have the ability to see who is part of the 24 funds?
Chairwoman, yes, as they form those funds, so we've been out meeting, Economic Development's been out meeting with the funds, encouraging them to make placements in the areas that the council districts have identified were of importance to you during the Opportunity Zone formation. So we've been out meeting with them. They do have to form either corporations or LLCs or partnerships or some type of a legal entity. And to the extent that the investors in that legal entity are public information, we should be able to find that out from the Corporation Commission.
So do they have to be public for public information, or is there a way to be anonymous?
You know, Chairman, that's a good question from a legal standpoint that I don't know the answer to. I do know that they have to form in the creation of opportunity zones. They do have to form an entity to be able to take advantage of the tax benefit. So to that level that they would have to reveal their information to the federal government, the Internal Revenue Service, they would have to be public record. But I don't know from the anonymous side. When I go to cash in, I'd have to reveal myself because I'd have to show who I was.
Yeah.
But I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find that out for you.
Councilwoman Mendoza.
Thank you. A couple of questions. If we were to move to redevelop this site, how much can the city generate in the future, seeing that this is a 9 acre, right? 10 acre parcel?
Chairwoman, Councilwoman Mendoza, we don't have an analysis on that. It would depend on what the council, if the council were to choose to take it out for redevelopment, it would depend on what came in as the proposal, whether there were high-rise residential, whether it was retail, whether office, hotel. all those different entities would provide different revenues into the city at different levels. So we would have to see what that analysis, we certainly could put together a hypothesis, but we wouldn't know firmly until we knew what was coming in.
But we would be making more than $1 million?
If we, to Councilman
what making-
Nowakowski's point, if we use Cityscape, which we use during the Talking Stick Resort Arena meetings, which is why it's in the top of my mind, a similar development has about $6.5 million in return to the city if you were to have office and hotel and retail and residential as a mixed use. That's approximately what Cityscape makes in revenue to the city.
Okay, so more than $1 million. So that's-
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Quick question, and go ahead.
Go ahead.
A couple of factors that would also need to be considered is the city going to continue to be the landlord of the real estate? And then also, depending on what our decision is relative to the redevelopment of the South Hall site, there are expenses of deconstructing the structure that's currently there and erecting what you put in its place, and who bears that cost. So that would be an offset against other revenue that we might realize.
That would be all in the RFP, right? That would be an RFP issue? With regarding to renovation or?
We could ask the marketplace
it's-
for their best
That would be part of the
proposal.
RFP, that's what I'm trying to say.
You could put it in there, there's no guarantee what you get back.
Right.
Yes.
But that's a possibility.
Yes.
I have another question, if I may. Can you go back to the slide where the convention centers and,
This one?
no, there's another one, by cities, the one by the city.
Oh, okay. That one.
Okay, so I know that one of the issues we always, and we've talked about this a lot, it's the hotels. We need more hotels.
Correct.
Currently, we have 2 convention hotels in the city, in downtown area. If we were to add another convention hotel in this redevelopment, would that help you compete in the market?
Councilwoman Mendoza, in our industry, convention centers and hotels go hand in hand. They need each other to be successful because you can't book business if you don't have a sufficient amount of sleeping rooms for the out-of-town convention attendees. So as we look at future expansion needs, we would need to look at, convention hotel, a full-service hotel as a part of that analysis.
Okay. I like to see Chris go out and start now and meeting with stakeholders and doing an analysis and just seeing what people and the stakeholders are envisioning for this area. For the central station, and you're going to know this, Chris, for the central station, did the city do a robust community meetings with stakeholders and users of the central station?
Chairwoman, Councilwoman Mendoza, yes. For our RFPs that we issue, we do significant community outreach, both before the issuance to before we come to council and ask for the issuance so that we can gather what the community's input is, as well as after we have a recommended proposer.
Okay, thank you.
So John, I will be asking you to come back in June. And in June, this is not posted for action, this is only posted for information. But I believe it wouldn't hit the 8-hour rule to look at a timeline and a plan for community engagement, and so that then the item can be set for action, and then we can move forward. And in June, I believe it's still under the 8-hour rule. Mark Metz, you're here to speak on item 10.
Good morning. It's Mark Metis at the Herberger Theater Center. I'm president and CEO there, and good morning. Thank you for giving me a moment to address you. The Herberger Theater Center is directly across the street from the phase 1 of the convention center. The convention center is our liaison, if you will, to the city, and so the health of the Phoenix Convention Center directly affects us. It affects our the companies that operate or that perform at the theater, and the patrons that come to the theater. So we're very interested in what's going on there. This is, next week we will have our 726th event in and around the center. This year that will be the highest number we've ever had, on our way to 800 this year. So we're doing events inside in all 3 performance spaces, outside, in front of the center and on the east side of the center. And so what's happening around us is of great interest to us. Any discussion of development of 3rd Street has great interest to us and can affect us and those companies. So you asked for stakeholder input. I'm already here to say that we'd like to provide input into the process. Thank you.
So let me clarify something. I think it's June, I don't know. I want to say my next meeting is June 4th. And then I would like that to go, I guess I would want it to go to council June 19th. Yeah, the following formal, so. Mendoza.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So just a little timeline. So I know that we have our summer break coming up, and this opportunity zone will probably be out like July-ish or next month sometime. So I want to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity that's coming down throughout the United States. So if we bring this back, our next subcommittee, then what happens there? We take to full council, and then when do we bring it back?
Then they do their outreach.
So how much time do you need for your outreach?
I don't know, that's the 8-hour rule.
My thing is,
I don't know.
I'm confused because like on Van Buren Central, how did we do that process, or what was?
What was that, a 4-year process?
Was that, and then when did the 8-hour rule come in at that time? I'm just confused because this is the first time I'm seeing that staff's not allowed to go and start.
Well, I put it on it for
Yeah.
information only, so
Right.
that's where probably the confusion is.
Right.
I was asked to put it on the calendar. I put it on for information only. June 4th, then we could take action for an 8-hour rule and come with a plan for community outreach.
I like to see it go to the full council prior to that, so we can have it all done by July 3rd, our July 3rd meeting, so we don't lose investors that might be able to invest in a big project like this. I think if we wait
Well-
until over the summertime, that might be putting us 3 months behind the 8 ball, and it might be moving the project on somebody else's back burner instead of on the front burner. And I think we need to be more aggressive so that the Los Angeles, the Houstons, the Austins, Texases and stuff don't actually win these types of projects over us, right?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, if we accelerate the time frame for doing the community outreach, which certainly is doable, you would still be looking at an RFP process behind that, which would take a while to do. So the whole thing would not be able to be wrapped up in July. It would take longer than that to do both.
To issue an RFP?
To do the outreach, write the RFP, put it out in the marketplace, and then determine where you're going would take longer than July.
How long did it take us to do the Phoenix Suns arena? I mean, that was pretty quick. I mean, and that was a whole citywide, every district had hearings. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I think we need to understand that we're competing against other cities. We're the 5th largest city. If we don't take advantage of the tools that we have in our toolbox, now that we're gonna end up in the back seat of most of these projects because the funding is gonna be wiped out and the resources aren't gonna be there. So my concern is that, we're gonna be sitting here next year about this time approving an RFP and all the projects will be done, you know? So that's what I'm concerned about. The well's gonna dry up pretty soon. So we need to be
Councilwoman.
innovative and quick.
Mendoza.
Thank you. What's prohibiting staff right now, though, to do the outreach now till June, whenever it is, to come back to subcommittee? And then move to council like Councilwoman Pastor was asking?
Chairwoman, Councilwoman Mendoza, when we typically do an RFP that staff would bring forward.
Oh, this would be for outreach.
Right, and I'll into that, we would typically bring at the beginning of each fiscal year, here's the list of our properties that staff would like to take out for an RFP. Council says these are the properties you'd like to take out for an RFP. We start working with the community because we've got the list that council's approved of properties that you'd like to take us out for an RFP. Staff on its own traditionally does not go out to do community input until council has acknowledged that it's a property that you're interested in gaining community input on. That's why we bring our list at the beginning of each fiscal year. So although we bring the final product back to you for the issuance of the RFP at the beginning of each fiscal year, you've agreed with our initial list and understand what we're working on. So traditionally in that front, we don't do community outreach until council's given us a guidance or direction to go out to the community.
So here's what I would recommend. Here's what I would recommend. I was asked to put this on the agenda. This wasn't originally placed on my agenda. I was asked by the mayor to put it on my agenda. I put it on the agenda. I was asked to have a public comment, which is going to happen in June 4th, to be able to put together a process and a public comment. This is all in the practice and process of an RFP and the time that it goes into an RFP. If there are colleagues that want to skip that, then you have the ability to write a letter with 3 council people and you can have it asked to be placed on the council agenda. So I am following a process that I think is pure and has the ability to get community input and community stakeholders who use it versus a developer and somebody wanting to push their agenda regarding South Hall. So that's my recommendation. Councilman Nowakowski.
So stating that, this opportunity zone, was it something that was just created yesterday or has it been going on for a while?
Madam Chair, Councilman Nowakowski, the opportunity zones were released in December of 2018 with the budgets.
Yeah, so what this thing is, it's not driven by a developer or anything like that. It's an opportunity that we have as the city of Phoenix, being the 5th largest city, being number 15 when it comes to convention spaces, that there's been interest since a year and a half. And the reason I know is that it's my district and we talked about it. And we've been talking about this for a year and a half. Now the funding is there because of this so-called opportunity zone. So I think we as the city of Phoenix, if we, typical governments, keep dragging our feet, we're gonna lose the opportunity. So it's not trying to skip a process. What it is how do we make sure that we start the process instead of putting it off, and then the opportunity is gone. So my thing is, how can we get it out to the community, make sure that Central Phoenix, all the users, and all the stakeholders around the convention center actually have a chance to hear it. So if it's 5 meetings, then how can we start to maybe schedule those meetings, not passing 8-hour rules, but already scheduling those. We have the information of who the users are, so we can set up a users meeting. We can set up downtown, working with our Downtown Phoenix Inc. to coordinate all the businesses and stakeholders in the downtown area, and just have it all teed up so we can go through a process where the public has enough time to give their input, and that we as the city of Phoenix, being the 5th largest city and having real estate right in downtown that's worth a lot, that we take advantage of the opportunities. So I just wanted to clear that it's not developer driven. It's an opportunity that started about 3 years ago at the federal level.
Question.
It may not be developer-driven, but it's now a developer-driven in the sense of the opportunity zones. Opportunity zones were here 2018. 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, there was a presentation, and we had said at that time, a councilwoman had said, this is not ready, the community is not ready for this, we cannot, let's figure out what is best for the community and really what's best for the city. And what does that look like as a downtown? So I'm not debating regarding opportunity zones or not opportunity zones. What I am saying is there needs to be a pure process where community is clearly engaged in order to determine what downtown looks like. You just spoke, we were talking about South Hall. Now you mentioned put 3rd Street, do this, do that. If that's the case, there needs to be a robust conversation with the community and the engagement of the community on how we move this forward.
A year and a half ago, that actually was the proposal that was presented in front of us and that we debated and we talked about it.
What proposal?
The proposal that came to us, right?
The unsolicited?
Correct.
Oh.
Yeah. So we did actually debate this, talk about it. We actually did send our staff out there to talk to the stakeholders and the community. So I'm not sure if that 8-hour rule still holds from a year and a half ago. We've been talking about this. This is my district, and I'm just telling you that it's been out there in the public, and now we just got an opportunity to maybe actually make it happen.
And
it's not going to happen unless the staff and the city approves the RFP. So let's say if we don't get takers that are going to take advantage of the opportunity zone, then we can actually turn that away, right? We've turned many RFPs in the past down because of the benefit for the community benefit and the city benefit wasn't there. So I'm just letting everyone know that we're just trying to maximize the tax revenues out there and put more money into our general fund.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that it's your district. However, I think the downtown affects all districts and what that looks like and the users of that. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that you're a businessman and wanting to look at the opportunity zones and everything. But what I also know is government is not a business, and it's not about ROI. It's about serving a community and serving people within that community and including community in this process. So, Councilwoman Mendoza.
So this South Hall renovation, or what's going to happen there, conversation hasn't been from a year and a half. It's actually been for 11 years now. I've been working for City Council for 11 years, and it's always a topic every single year for the last 11 years. 11 years. So, and it always stopped at, well, what's going to happen with the arena? Well, now we know what's going to happen to the arena. So I don't understand why we haven't even looked into this and just, start something. So that's that. Second is, so if any business or anyone comes to me and ask about opportunity zone in my district, should I tell them to get on the list because that property or that development is not on the list per council direction? So should I tell them to just lose that opportunity and get on the list?
Madam Chair, Councilman Mendoza, if it's a city-owned property and it's one that's on our list that council's already approved for sale, it's listed on the city's website as an opportunity that they can then make a direct purchase of the site through our real estate department. If it's another property, and that's usually how we determine the properties to bring forward to city council for our recommendation as to the RFP list, we've typically been approached, someone in your offices or my office has been approached by someone who's interested in the property. And that's typically how we put them in order, because we know we've got interest in a particular property.
Okay, thank you. Is there a possibility, if we come back on the 4th, we have a council meeting on the 5th?
Oh, we'll put it on the
Could we
5th.
put it
Yeah.
on the 5th, and that would help expedite?
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's fine with me.
yeah,
Whatever.
it'll be a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Councilwoman Mendoza, I agree with you with starting something, and I think that's where we're at right now, is starting something. And then June 4th, you'll be back on the agenda. June 5th, you'll be on the formal, and we have started something. So
Sounds
really appreciate it. Thank you. So I have no call to the public. Do I have any other items that you want in the June agenda?
So I'd like to look at the CMEX property right off of Central Avenue in the river bottom as a possible 8-hour road to look at opportunity zones in that area. And I'll get you
So
a
you
list of
wanna-
other, so
so you
allow
want-
staff to go out there and,
Okay, so you want action on that?
right,
That's what I'm asking.
correct,
Okay. So you want information, discussion, and action
correct.
for the CMEX to do a community engagement piece
Engagement.
and then come back for an RFP.
Correct. Well,
Anything
no,
else?
we can't go for an RFP,
Or
but,
whatever,
Yeah.
whatever we need to do.
yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else? Meeting adjourned.